Welcome back to Literature Guide. Today's video is about Dadaism and Surrealism. It contains information about the techniques employed by the Dadaists and the Surrealists, artists and writers. The Dadaist movement began in 1916 during the First World War. Many of the writers and artists took refuge in Switzerland during the First World War. It was Hugo Ball who coined the term Dadaism. Dadaism has been considered as anti-art, anti-traditions and anti-bourgeois movement. Though it has been called as anti-art movement, it was not so because it was not against art but the basic concepts about art. The Dadaist movement began as a revolt against all the established norms and standards of art and literature. The chief members of the Dadaist movement were Hugo Ball, his wife Amy Hennings, Tristan Tzara, Man Ray, Max Ernst, Hans Arp, Andre Breton, Marcel Duchamp. Hugo Ball also founded a central platform for the Dadaist artists called Cabaret Voltaire in 1916 in Zurich. His wife Amy Hennings also performed at Cabaret Voltaire with Hugo Ball. She also recited her poems at the Cabaret Voltaire. Hugo Ball was against all the philosophical statements that claimed to hold absolute truth. The Dadaist writers and artists used ready-made objects and transformed those ordinary objects into works of art. Another famous movement of the same period was Surrealism. It began in 1924, though the term Surrealism had already been coined in 1917 by Guillaume Apollinaire. Surrealist artists and writers tried to explore the content of dreams, hallucinations, nightmarish experiences and sexual desire. These artists tried to understand the difference between rational and irrational. They tried to understand the relationship between the conscious and unconscious state of mind with reality. For that, they studied the psychoanalytic theories of the unconscious propounded by Sigmund Freud. These surrealist writers, they were influenced by Guillaume Apollinaire as well. The chief members of the surrealist movement were Paul Elwar, Louis Aragon, Guillaume Apollinaire, Hermann Hesse, Andre Breton, Benjamin Perret and other artists and writers. I have tried my level best to give you useful information through this video. If you watch this video keenly, you will come to know that almost every element and feature of Surrealism and Dadaism has been covered here in this video. If you really like the videos produced by this channel Literature Guide, do like and subscribe Literature Guide. I don't want to waste your time. Let's dive into a video and enjoy the video.
Dadaism and Surrealism. In the first quarter of the 20th century, a new art movement known as Dadaism took birth in Switzerland. The term Dadaism was coined by the German artist and writer, Hugo Ball, who was one of the founder members of Dadaism. Many Dadaist artists and writers took refuge in Switzerland during the First World War. After the First World War, the Dadaist movement had its centers in France, Germany, and America. Dadaism was primarily an anti-aesthetic and nihilistic reaction of art and literature. It also expressed despair and disgust over the destructive force of war, especially the First World War. The Dadaists artists and writers derived pleasure in employing collage, photomontage, and randomly chosen words in their works rather than in paintings and sculpture. It emphasized the principle of leaving a work of art to chance. Hugo Ball commented on the sorry state of society and expressed his anger and detestation for the established doctrines of philosophy that claimed to hold absolute truth. Dadaism was essentially anti-bourgeois, anti-nationalistic, and anti-materialistic movement that shattered the false values of modern bourgeois society to pieces, including its rationality. The Dadaist artists searched for new alternative art practices through which they could give vent to their pent-up feelings. They wanted to carve out their own world which would be completely different from the world around them. In Dadaism, it is not the object or idea which chooses an artist but the artist who chooses an object or idea and transforms it into a work of art. Many Dadaist artists and writers made use of automatic writing. It is kind of writing performed in a state of hypnosis or under the influence of drugs or liquor. André Breton and Philippe Soupault employed automatic writing in their work Les Champs Magnétiques, Magnetic Fields, published in 1920. A number of modernist writers recorded the promptings of their unconscious mind by employing the method of automatic writing. Ezra Pound, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, Thomas Stearns Eliot, and William Butler Yeats experimented with automatic writing. According to André Breton, Dada was a state of mind. It truly wanted to say no to established rules and conventions in art and literature. It aimed at changing the countenance of art which was thought to be rational and logical. The Dadaist chose a peculiar name for the movement on purpose since it was against meaningfulness. In this way, the term Dadaism denotes everything and nothing. The chief members of Dadaism were Hugo Ball, his wife Emmy Hennings, Tristan Tzara, Hans Arp, Marcel Duchamp, Man Ray, and Max Ernst. Hugo Ball produced the Dada Manifesto in 1916. Many of the Dadaist artists later on joined Surrealism in 1921. In his works, Hugo Ball emphasized the need to create poetry not merely by using words but to compose poetry out of the words. It means that the Dadaist writers were to create a new kind of language. Hugo Ball's famous poem Carawan comprises nonsensical words which reflect nothing but meaninglessness. That is one of the principles of Dadaism. Another famous poem of Hugo Ball is Collection 7 Schizophrene Sonnet. It is important to note that Hugo Ball founded a central performance platform for the Dada artists called Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich. It became a center for poetry reading, music, dance performances and exhibitions. It is important to note that his wife, Emmy Hennings, was also one of the active members of Dadaism. She was an artist, singer and poet. She wrote a collection of poems called Ether Poems, or Athagedict in 1913. She also recited her poems and performed at Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich. Marcel Duchamp, one of the finest artists of Dadaism, created the fountain by employing a regular white porcelain urinal. He wanted to suggest that the artist has got the intellectual power to select any object he likes which would become a work of art. Tristan Tzara, Romanian and French avant-garde essayist, artist and poet, produced his plays The Gas Heart in 1921 and Handkerchief of Clouds in 1924. He has also been considered as the founder of Dadaism. He was influenced by André Breton. Tristan Tzara also composed a surrealist poem The Approximate Man. Man Ray, another important figure of Dadaism, was a photographer and filmmaker. He experimented with the technique called solarization, in which he rendered a photograph as part negative and part positive when it was exposed to a flashlight. Man Ray also wrote an autobiography, namely, Self-Portrait, in 1963. According to Hans Arp, Dada movement is for the senseless, which does not mean nonsensical. Dada is senseless like nature. It is for nature and against art. He liked to play with the idea of spontaneity and chance. Hans Arp produced some strange collages by making use of paper cutouts. He made the collages by dropping the cutouts from the air and gluing them where they fell. Hannah Hock employed photomontages in order to create an image of a modern woman. John Hartfield and Rudolf Schlichter created a life-size doll of a soldier with the head of a pig. It was called as the Prussian Archangel. There was a huge response to Dadaist modern painting, sculptures, photography and filmmaking, which helped to promote experimentation both in poetry and drama in the first quarter of the 20th century. It influenced many modernist writers including Ezra Pound and Thomas Stearns Eliot. Though Dadaism has been called as anti-art movement, it is not so because it was not against art in general but against the conventional idea of art. Unlike the other art movements, Dadaists employed ready-made objects and articles in order to create new ones out of them. They showed abhorrence for the habit of pursuing meaning. In 1920, the first International Dada Art Fair was held in Berlin. The exhibition hall was decorated with various art forms, even the ceiling of the exhibition hall was not left blank. After the demise of Dadaism in 1921, a new art movement named Surrealism took birth in 1924. Surrealism has been hailed as anti-rational imagination liberation in art and literature. The main goal of Surrealist writers was to emancipate art and literature from all restraints including logical reason, standard morality, social and artistic conventions and norms. The Surrealist artists and writers tried to reach beyond the limits of the real. They tried to fathom out the depth of the unconscious state of mind which they believed to be the only source of valid knowledge and art. They explored the blurred boundaries between rationality and irrationality. The Surrealist artists made use of the material of dreams, of states of mind between sleep and waking, sexual desire, hallucinations. They produced content of natural or drug-induced hallucinations. The Surrealists juxtaposed dissimilar images and objects which often surprised the viewers. The chief members of Surrealist movement are André Breton, Philippe Soupault, Paul Elwar, Guillaume Apollinaire, Benjamin Pett, Salvador Dali, Louis Aragon, and Hermann Hesse. André Breton, the French poet, has been deemed as the founders of Surrealism, which began in 1924. He composed Manifeste du Surrealisme in 1924. He was closely associated with Dadaism, which was in vogue between 1919 and 1921. André Breton was greatly influenced by the writings of Guillaume Apollinaire and Sigmund Freud's The Theories of the Unconscious. The first collection of poetry of André Breton, namely, Mont de Piété, appeared in 1919. He also worked with Philippe Soupault on the surrealist work Les Champs Magnétiques, Magnetic Fields, which was published in 1920 before the official opening of Surrealism. The work was an experiment in automatic writing. André Breton composed a number of collections of poetry such as Clair de Terre, Earthlight in 1920, and Le Revolver à Cheveux Blancs, The White-Haired Revolver in 1932. Another collection of poetry called L'air de l'eau, The Air of the Water, was published in 1934. André Breton also published some excellent prose narratives such as Nadja in 1928, Les Vases Communicants, The Communicating Vessels in 1932. The other remarkable prose narratives of André Breton are L'Amour Fou, Mad Love, published in 1937, and Arcane 17 appeared in 1944. Many editions of surrealism in art were published between 1928 and 1965, known as Le Surrealisme et la Peinture, Surrealism and Painting. Paul Elwar, the French poet, was one of the leading figures of the surrealist group of writers. He produced a number of volumes of poetry such as Les Déçus d'une Vie ou La Pyramide Humaine, The Human Pyramid, in 1926. Other famous volumes are Capitale de la Douleur, Capital of Pain, published in 1926, and L'Amour, La Poésie, Love, Poetry, in 1929. The other famous collections of poetry of Paul Elwar are La Vie Immédiate, The Immediate Life, in 1932, La Rose Publique, The Public Rose, in 1934, and Les Yeux Fertiles, The Fertile Eyes, in 1936. Paul Elwar collaborated with André Breton and Max Ernst. With André Breton he wrote L'Immaculée Conception, The Immaculate Conception, in 1930, and worked with Max Ernst on Les Malheurs des Mortels, The Misfortunes of the Immortal, in 1922. The term surrealism had already been coined by Guillaume Apollinaire in 1917, though the movement began much later in 1924. Guillaume Apollinaire was a renowned member of the surrealist group of writers. His play The Breast of Tiresias was his earliest surrealist experiment, which appeared in 1917. The play was adapted by Francis Poulenc for his famous opera Les Mamelles de Tiresias, was published in 1945 and performed in 1947. Hermann Hesse's novel Narcissus and Goldmund appeared in 1930. It is surrealist work set in the Middle Ages. His novel The Glass Bead Game also holds the surrealist elements. The Glass Bead Game was published in 1943. John Henry Gray's surrealist novel Park, A Fantastic Story, is set in the future. It was published in 1932. David Gascoigne produced a short survey of surrealism in 1935, and he translated many works of the surrealist writers of France. He wrote Man's Life is His Meat in 1936 and Hölderlin's Madness in 1938. David Gascoigne was greatly inspired by Guillaume Apollinaire and Paul Elwar. Louis Aragon, the French poet, novelist and political activist, was a staunch supporter of the surrealist movement. At the beginning of his literary career, he was greatly influenced by Dadaism but later on diverted to surrealism in 1924. He composed a number of collections of poetry such as Feu de Joie in 1921 and Le Mouvement Perpétuel in 1926. He also wrote the Mondréal trilogy, which comprises Les Cloches de Bâle, The Bells of Basel, in 1934. The other two novels of the trilogy are Les Beaucourtiers, Residential Quarter, published in 1936, and Les Voyageurs de l'Impérial in 1942. Louis Aragon's novel Le Pagan, de Paris appeared earlier than his trilogy in 1926. It is important to note that Louis Aragon founded a literary review Literature in collaboration with André Breton and Philippe Soupault in 1919. It became the mouthpiece of the surrealist movement. Raymond Cant, the French poet, essayist and novelist, handled the surrealist elements artistically in his surrealist novels Zazie dans le métro, Zazie in the Underground, published in 1959. He experimented with literary forms and studied the difference between spoken and written language. Thornton Wilder, the American novelist and playwright, was also influenced by surrealism. He produced the play The Skin of Our Teeth in 1942. The play is tinged with the surrealist elements. He also composed novels such as The Bridge of San Luis Rey in 1927 and The Ides of March in 1948. Many English writers such as Dylan Thomas, William Burroughs, Thomas Pynchon, and Henry Miller employed the surrealist ingredients such as non-logical order, a broken syntax, juxtaposition of shocking unrelated images and dreamlike and nightmarish sequences in their literary works. Thus, Dadaism and Surrealism adhered to their own principles and were in vogue in 1920s and 1930s. They changed the countenance of art and literature in modern age.
I think you liked this video on Dadaism and Surrealism. I will meet you soon with a new and interesting topic of English literature. But before I leave the camera, if you really like the content produced by this channel Literature Guide, do like and subscribe Literature Guide so that this channel can continue producing useful content for you in future also. I will meet you soon with a new video on interesting topic. Meet you.
Please subscribe Literature Guide.